Usually we get a good wallop every 600 years or so. And that's about now. And, everybody nods sagely and writes it down in their book. And then in the middle of the night when it does come, I just remember hanging onto the door frame thinking, well, the 600 years is up.
There's something profoundly upsetting when the ground moves under your feet. It's kind of something more inordinately upsetting than it should be. I mean, when you talk about things being rock solid, your feet are on the ground, they're all saying that's there, that's what we reference ourselves to. And when that's unstable, it's profoundly upsetting.
Was that when the land became humanised in a way? Because you always see it as such a static thing. It's always there.
After the first earthquake, there was a lot of verbiage about we'll all be done and dusted in no time at all, because nobody knew that February was going to come on. The thing that shook me in February was the stunned silence of the city.
We realised we were vulnerable. We're not invincible.
And I remember that night, and I did the same on February the 22nd, that I counted how many aftershocks, through the night. And both those 2 nights, they were every 8 minutes. So there's that underlying physical impact that has on you.
So the big earthquake is the memory, but the aftershocks just tick away. They remind you of the big one. And it wouldn't affect you for a year, and then you could get one that would tip you. No rhyme or reason, it could be anywhere.
So all those things that make you familiar with the place were lost. And when it became to the point where you couldn't even trust the ground beneath your feet, and that's what aftershocks did to you after a while, was that you just totally lost confidence in the earth to be where it should be. Then you lose that sense of comfort and security you've got where you live.
After the earthquakes, quite a lot of the central city was cordoned off. After the February earthquake, closed off. The experience of walking through a broken city is profoundly challenging. It's visceral, it's emotional, it's not a rational kind of understanding. When you walk through, crushed buildings and smashed places, particularly places that you knew and loved, there's a grief that you have to come to terms with.
My brother arrived from Australia sometime in that year, and we were driving through the city, and he said, "Whoa, the trees and the river are still here." And it was like, yeah, they are.
A lot of the reference points were either piles of rubble or had already been in the process of being moved away. So what we were left with was basically the grid pattern of the street. And in a way, the features of the natural environment, like the Avon River, they were actually the constants, I think.
In retrospect, I still think it was one of the more damaging things that we did, was the cordon. It meant that nothing happened in the central city for that time, in spite of the fact, the theory was that it was going to enable efficient clearance of buildings and people would get back in and start building straight away. But nothing like that happened. So about 80% of the buildings in the in the centre of the city were pulled down, and they're pulled down for all sorts of reasons. They didn't have to be pulled down. They could have been repaired, most of them. But they come down to economic decisions, and mainly to do with insurance.
And increasingly, as people moved out and the communities just dissolved, it became a no-go area right through the heart of the east. And that meant that people became very disconnected from the river, very disconnected from each other and the old communities that were there. Some of them divided in half, some of them disappeared altogether.
This research defines emotional infrastructure as the social and spatial aspects of place that support emotional processing, sense of belonging, and a collective capacity for care.
We're limited by what we can easily see and map. How can we shift our design processes to account for invisible considerations like emotion, attachment, and meaning? Oppressive systems determine which voices get heard. How can we embrace a multiplicity of narratives through time and place? Increasing disturbance means more losses to physical infrastructure, more climate refugees, and more stress on collective resources. How can we find opportunity in adapting to a dynamic new normal?
How did everyday environments support healing, grounding, and emotional resettling for Christchurch residents following the earthquakes?
We start by acknowledging that emotions and attachments are not so neatly framed in time and space. These layers are presented as a reminder of the context and the lens through which different people experienced the disturbance of the earthquakes.
In order to cope, there was the immediate relationship with the neighbours.
There's a gathering together, I guess, of looking after each other. How do you survive? How do you get water? Where's the nearest well? And it became like the village well. You'd arrive there and you'd talk to people. You'd find out what was going on. This kind of availability of water, that was pretty kind of special, emotional kind of attachment to those. The local ones closed down a while ago. It was kind of sad to see it go.
Sewage wasn't working at home, so you had portaloos to go to, and people made them their own. And I remember that distinct feeling of loss when they were all taken away. It was just like,
Retreat Reserve became the village hub by default because there was nowhere else for that community to gather. And that's where they located about 6 big, enormous container-sized generators. It was also a place where the community could meet each other and share their experiences and get solace from each other and know they weren't alone in trying to deal with this. When we coped with that immediately after the earthquakes, because we thought that this was just what we had to go through before we came back to a stable environment. But it's been a long time stabilising.
Everything's changed around you, but you're trying to live a normal life.
it was very important to connect with people in the parks and in the spaces that were close to where we lived, because we couldn't live here any longer. The landscape was really, really key. Still, we wanted to be in this valley. We wanted to feel home. Didn't want to disconnect ourselves any further from what we didn't have anymore.
Because the notion of comfortability can be linked to the places that were there pre-earthquake, which are actually, I would define as colonial space. Mm-hmm. So to what extent am I locked into that is what now makes me comfortable, because it's the familiar.
Everybody is going through trauma and change. Everybody's life was different. And I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel on my own. I didn't feel like I was going through a trauma on my own, because everybody was going through something.
You didn't have to say.
You don't need to talk, you just need to know that I'm just another of the many who are with you on this.
It's very satisfying for me to know that I'm part of something bigger.
Really gave me that feeling of being just a tiny little tinsy-wincy, minuscule drop in an ocean, in time and space. And so I guess there's a fresh realisation or a deeper sense of belonging to this land.
I felt the loss of the land acutely. Been very aware of the thin sort of scab that covers this planet that's managed to cool, and we've settled on it, and we've, in a very short time, we've managed to, looks like, ruin it. There's always that realisation that this presence, this possibility is here all the time.
For Māori, when we introduce ourselves, for instance, we recite what we call our pepeha. And what we're doing is we're locating ourselves in the place. We're saying, this is my mountain, this is my river. It's spatial, historical, ancestral, it's a whole lot. But what we're doing is we're identifying who we are and what brings us to this particular spot. And it's about locating ourselves. So Māori do that all the time. And it's about identifying who they are. Because who they are is not only defined by their history and their ancestry, but by their place in the environment.
Where you see yourself in the world is about where you stand on the land, your relationship to the river, but also your relationship to others around you, and how you identify as a group, and how you get some of that identity from landmarks in the place.
So your whole seasonality, your living cycle was around the environment you lived in. And it's very, very good for the soul and very good for the heart. Bloody hard to reinvent when you're uplifted and told go and live somewhere else.
The citizens of Christchurch are dealing with their loss, and there's a trauma that goes with loss. But our people have been dealing with that for generations.
With the earthquakes, our European brothers and sisters lost some of their heritage or their familiar.
Trauma creates a bond. It also creates a sense of elevated consciousness, I think, that can then provide a platform for really working together.
It's actually helped us reconnect with local iwi and understand their grievances.
It's really a system in the community that is being affected more so than the environment, really, in my mind. Is it damaged? Is it actually has something gone wrong with it? In my mind, it has not. From the Māori perspective, I'm thinking if you've got papatuanuk and you've got uroama, and it's just growing pains, it's just tension.
In our traditions, in the Māori tradition, we're the younger siblings of most of the things in nature. We're the last thing to be created, not the first.
This being a colony, people came and they were desperate to remember England. So they just bulldozed, as it were, chopped down, sawed down all the native flora wherever they lived and put in anything that they could from England. And that kind of connection with English and European flora as opposed to native flora is still a bone of contention.
We're very impacted by island biogeography. We're really black and white about native.
I hate going to the Botanic Gardens because once again, it's all laid out in front of me. All the vegetation from England, I don't feel as though I'm in altitude at all. We were just walking through the Botanic Gardens, so we took another turn, and all of a sudden we were in this bloody glade that was just planted out of natives. I really couldn't get over it. I just thought, wow, like that made me feel good. I can take the Indigenous narrative and I can walk through it, and it makes me feel as though I'm here. If you don't have the physical reference points to guide you, you can use your imagination.
I imagine myself living there, realising how our people move through the landscape is important.
It's about losing personal references.
Where's your point of referral?
There's touchstones and trigger points.
Marker trees or marker stones.
Everybody wanted to understand earthquakes and why they happened. So the local university had some lectures. This was probably 9 months or 12 months afterwards, and they were turning away 500 people because people wanted to go and sit and listen to the expert talk about earthquakes.
There's that kind of a scientific basis for safety, perhaps.
Sumner in Christchurch, I kind of seen the tsunami drawings there, and it's just a nightmare. The wave comes in and it kind of rattles round inside and everything on the valley floor is destroyed. So it has changed my perception of some places and my comfortableness with them. Not entirely rationally, arguably New Brighton and a place like that are just as bad as Sumner, but somehow it's the enclosed character of Sumner that worries me a little bit. Yeah, and I guess it's a perception of hazard that I didn't have before.
Having learned more about what makes the waterways healthier and what to do to make the waterways healthier has made me more connected to the river. And now that I understand that, I'm more interested in it, and I'm more interested in watching it and observing it. And it's the same with a lot of the Ngāi Tahu design. Unless we really get people to sense that. I've done 2 or 3 walks with the Ngāi Tahu interpreter, and it's like, now this really makes sense to me. And now I value these spaces in a way that I would never have in the past.
As soon as I heard that rumble, the beginnings, I started to swear loudly at the earthquake.
Don't you dare, shout.
And
dare.
And it rose in a crescendo as the earthquake did.
Talk to it as a force, from your own force, like a person-to-person response.
I want you to leave the house and go and knock on our neighbour's door. And when you've checked on them, go and knock on the next door. So she did that, and she just felt mobilised. After that, grounded, in control, moving forward.
The relief I got was actually playing with clay, which is still soil, still from the earth, but, creating stuff.
After the earthquake, there's a period of emergency response, we're all disaster and you're fixing problems and making things safe, kind of getting the basic services back on. And then there's a gap, and in Christchurch it was probably 5 years till the first big permanent development started opening up. And in that period, there was a huge amount of work happening. Lots of planning, lots of design, funding, but nobody could see it. And that transitional stuff, they're the projects that people saw on the ground. And what was amazing is they could participate in it.
I hope that we don't lose that in the city. I hope continue to be opportunities for us as lay people to be able to create spaces.
Actually, I love Christchurch more as a result of the earthquakes, partly because I put so much of myself into, trying to make it a better place.
I love it because it's given me a purpose.
So what does emotional infrastructure do?
It enables location of self in time and place by affording stability, reference, understanding, and agency.
How can we foster it in the built environment?
It's never been just one city. I mean, that is a statement about power. So it's never just been one city. I mean, that's Christchurch, but it's also Ōtautahi. There's another name for it. But at this stage, we only see the dominant city. We've actually got to drill in a bit, see the different cities within.
I'm less invested in what you might call some of the bigger narratives about the city. The dominant narrative is quite a conservative one.
It was always seen as the very white, middle-class English garden city.
History takes a long time to change with these occasional big moments in them. And this was a big moment which probably has pushed us forward.
The disturbance, disruption, whatever, it forces a rethink. It forced Christchurch to rethink its own history.
That gap or that chink that's created has meant that the things that generally were sitting under the surface and weren't given much space have been allowed to percolate through.
Necessity dictates that you actually maybe revert back to something that you know is right, and maybe that's the opportunity the earthquakes has provided, is to remind people actually what is right and what are the values that everyone holds true, and it's about care, and is that attached to the sort of monarchy, so that hospitality to one another.
And it's while we're feeling vulnerable that community suddenly makes sense.
I like what we are becoming. I still see it as a process. I don't think we're there.
The earthquake has helped, it's accelerated the presence of us back in the city.
It's about care and how important it is to make sure that we look after this so that it looks after us.
We saw ourselves as caretakers of the river.
Where we live was absolutely peppered with people who we connected with and we cared about, and they cared about us.
I think Māori are more communal anyway, so when the natural disaster happens, it was just something that they sort of already do. So, if they go out catch fish, it's not just for their own home unit, they'll go and give it around the whānau or to the neighbours, that sort of stuff. So it's already a sort of way of life anyway. So when the earthquakes kicked in, it was just on a more urgent and bigger scale, but it wasn't too different to the way life normally is anyway.
Remember that that's how we survive, that we know one another, and that we would go, as we say, go to bat for one another in a crisis. We're living on this very little planet that we've just about torn apart, and it's very important for us to learn how to be together, and we have to do that by talking to one another. We cannot do it passing someone holding onto a screen. You have to meet someone's eyes and ask them how they are.
Exchange ideas as human beings, and that is the most amazing thing. I mean, it's like a gift we give each other.
The idea of quiet people thinking, is it just a gift? No, it's not. It's actually, there's responsibility on both parts. The reason you're giving it and the reason why you're taking it.
This is cathartic for me. Just this conversation, just this sharing of things.
I love the fact that we can change, because we're a much different community than we were. So many more new immigrants in Christchurch, and they're not all from England.
In the future, there's going to be more people. We've got Māori, Europeans, which included English, French, American. We've had Polynesian people come here from Samoa and Tonga and the islands, Rarotonga, because of colonial policies as well. Then we've had Asians. The Chinese have actually been here since the 1860s and the gold rushes, but Japanese more recently, Korean, everything. Somalian refugees. We've got everything here, and so does every country. And you've just got to know your history, and just be able to tell everyone that's coming what the real story is. But unfortunately, in most of our colonial Western societies, we haven't done that. We've just told the European story, ignored the first one, told the European story, and tried to hold the line against immigrants, against everything. We'll just get over it, eh? That's what I reckon. It's not going to stop, and with climate change, it's probably going to get worse. The islands of the Pacific, they're going to come, and good on them. I want them to come. It'd be cool, actually. New Zealand will be a bit browner. It's all right with me. It might not be all right with a lot of people, but it's all right with me.